Well, welcome. Glad to have you here this afternoon or late morning if you're joining us from the West Coast. I'm glad you're here. As people are getting settled and coming in, we'd love to hear where you're coming from. So in the chat box there, if you'll tell us your congregation and your city and state so we know where some folks are coming from. My name is Lee Hall Moses. I am Chief of Staff in the Office of the General Minister and President for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And one of the things that I do as part of my work is work with Disciples Mission Fund, which is the shared funding source for our denomination. And I love to talk with folks about the practice of generosity and stewardship and how that is a part of our faith practice and our Christian tradition. So it's an honor today to be joining together with Bruce Barkhauer, who is the director of our Center for Faith and Giving, which is our stewardship education ministry for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And Bruce also loves to talk about generosity and stewardship, so we are so pleased that you're here to join us in this conversation about what stewardship looks like in this particularly challenging season of church life that we are in right now. It's great to see some folks from Ohio and Arkansas, Kansas, Jacksonville, Florida, another Ohio, Washington State, Missouri, Maryland, West Virginia, Texas, Hawaii, Fort Worth, Kentucky, Massachusetts. Oh, we're just so thrilled to have folks from all over the place. We're really glad you're here. Thanks for joining us. We are going to have some time later in our time together for some questions. And so if, as we're chatting today, you've got something you want to hear more about, if you'll just make a note in the chat there and we'll keep track of that. And as time allows, address as many of those as we can toward the end of our hour together. But again, just so glad that you're here, and I'm really glad to have a chance to talk with and learn from Bruce Barkhauer from the Center of Faith and Giving. Bruce.
Lee, thank you so much. It's a privilege, really, to be with you and for all of the folks who are giving us some time this afternoon in the East Coast, some morning time at the end of their morning on the West Coast. We're really grateful that you've tuned in to be a part of this, and we hope to provide some resources that will be really helpful to you going forward. I'm going to start, though, just a way to keep your attention by asking a poll question of you. Very simple. I'll ask Lee to put this up. And that question is, how is your church doing financially as of August 31? And you can see from the poll there, you've got several options. You're about where you expected to be. Maybe you're ahead of where you expected to be. You might be behind, or you might not know. We see all of those as acceptable answers, and we'd like to see what you can tell us about how life is like in your part of the church. Folks are checking in really well here, and it looks like we're seeing what we have anecdotally been able to measure across the life of the church, which is that about 2/3 of the church is experiencing at or even above where they expected to be at this time. This is a great chance to say thank you to generous people who have really stepped up and stepped in to support the work that the church is doing in these unusual times. We're grateful for that. A few of our churches are behind where they expected to be, and so we want to provide some encouragement for those folks and hopefully some tools that will be useful as we move through the fall and toward the end of the year. Well, the part of this webinar is entitled "What Next?", which is the question I think most of us are afraid to ask, right? What else? What next could happen in 2020? It has been one of the most bizarre years of my 60 plus years of living that I can remember. And I expect that's true for many of you as well. Just very unusual circumstances in which we're living. But I think there are a few things that we know about what's next. I think we know, for example, that while we may not know how this will happen, we know that we're still going to be a communal faith, that we'll still need to be in community with one another, because that's the faith of the Judeo-Christian tradition. It is It is for a collective whole. It's rarely about individuals. It is about how we work and behave and respond to one another in community. It's about the communal worship of God. It's about the communal response to what God is doing in the world. And so I can't predict exactly what it's going to be like in 2021 and beyond, but I know that we're going to have to find some way to be together. Now, it's very possible that, particularly when it comes to our worship life, some of the folks who've discovered that morning coffee, dog in the lap, and pajama pants is a really cool way to go to worship, and they may continue to worship that way the majority of times they worship with us. That's a possibility. They may still show up for the high holy days, but there may be a lot of people who continue to participate in the streaming option if we offer that as a hybrid. If your congregation is not yet back in the sanctuary, but at some point is, continuing to live stream may be very popular with some of your folks. And I know that a lot of you have had to learn a lot in the middle of all of this, and many of you never dreamed you'd be a web evangelist, but here you are. You've had to acquire new skills so that we could do this very thing of being together. So in terms of answering what's next, clearly that's one of the things that we know. Another thing is that we'll still have to do discipleship and faith formation. There's still going to have to be some way in which we engage people in teaching the faith and what it means to follow Jesus, what it means to be a believer in the way of Christ, and how do we shape ourselves in the context of sitting with the sacred text. How does it inform our faith? How does it mold us into the likeness of Christ and into the desire of God for the world? So as Paul says, we're still going to have to give an account for the hope that is in us. That's how Paul sees Scripture. And I think that we know that, again, it may be by Zoom, it may be by some kind of hybrid, there may be yet some next technology that comes along, but we're still going to have to teach the faith. So we have faith and we have hope, and I would say of what's next that there will still be mission. There will be that concrete expression of love in the world, because that's what we exist to do. That's the whole purpose of being church, is to bear witness to the transformational work of God in the world, to bear witness to the unconditional love of God and the grace of God. And we do that in concrete, tangible ways with people and intersecting their lives with the gospel. And so that's going to happen. I love Emil Brunner from the middle of the last century. He was great, neo-Orthodox theologian and very involved in the ecumenical movement as it unfolded. He wrote that the church exists for mission as a fire exists for burning. I think that quote has stuck with me for many, many years. And it's one of the things we know. So that's our faith, hope, and love, the greatest of these, which is love, right? And I think also what's next is we are a spiritual community, and we will have to engage in prayer, because prayer is the way in which we express our desire for God to shape and mold us, for us to know the will of God, for us to be in community with one another, for us to listen and discern what it is that will help it be more on earth like it is in heaven. That the praying community is connected relationally in a particular kind of way, in a compassionate, expressive, responsive way, that we bear one another's burdens, that we share one another's joys. All of that takes place in the practice of being a praying community. And so I think that when I think about what church will look like next, I think this is a piece of it. Again, how that will completely bear its expression, it's hard to say. Our prayer groups might meet online, and we're getting a great model of how to do that from Terry Hord Owens, our general minister and president, who does that every week with us. What a gift that has been for us to connect that way. It might look like that. It might look like something different, but I think we are a praying community as we go forward. That's a what next, the thing that I think we can count on. And the last thing, and it just so happens to be what I do for a living, so you might expect that I would raise this issue, is that we are going to be stewards. We have to be, because that's how that concrete expression of love is resourced, how it's enabled, how it's empowered. And so we garner the resources of time, talent, and treasure, the giftedness of the community, the financial resources we need to be able to apply that as a tool to help make change in the world, to help bring compassion into the midst of those who are suffering. This is going to happen, that we're going to have to continue to be stewards, and in a more holistic way that is not just about money, right? Because stewardship is about care for the earth and exercising our dominion and caring for one another, that the flow of resources that God has established in the world continue to move out and bless folks. I'm a big fan of Eric Law's, and Eric Law talks about the flow of resources as an act of stewardship. And when they get stopped up, when resources don't flow and they get held onto and hoarded, that's when that's when the world suffers, when it doesn't live into its full potential. And that's a stewardship issue. And so I think that this is an important understanding of what we know we can look forward to in the future, that these things are pretty solid and concrete. Again, how we will give them expression will probably be different than the ways we did them in February of 2020 and earlier. But I think that we can kind of count on these things. So I want to set that as kind of a base framework for us. And I'll let Lee throw up another poll question in case anybody's already started to take that afternoon nap. Just a real simple question, yes or no. Do you normally do a stewardship emphasis or an annual campaign or a stewardship program in your church during the course of the year? We just would love to know how many of you are engaged in that, because this is going to hopefully feed into those of you who do this already, and will challenge some of you who may not be doing this as a way to understand how doing an annual emphasis can be really helpful in your context and in your congregation. So it looks like again, the majority of our people who are on today's webinar are doing a stewardship emphasis, and I think that's wonderful. And I learned from the Lewis Research Center several years ago that they had calculated that congregations that do an annual emphasis can expect to do 2 to 2.5 times more in terms of receiving resources, particularly financial resources, than those who do not. So there's some learning there and some benefit to us to think about that. So we talk about what's next. I'd like to also then talk about what works, particularly for those of you who are doing campaigns, and for those of you who might be considering how do we have this conversation, particularly in this moment in time with our people. What are some things that we know work? What are some things that will likely work into the context in which we're moving? And clearly one of those is we've seen it and been able to measure it, is that the stewardship campaign should be vision focused, that it should be telling the story, the sacred story of how it is that your congregation is engaged in mission and ministry, why we do that, what we're doing, and what difference does it make. It's especially important to let folks understand what difference it makes. The days of giving just to the institution because we're the church are kind of gone. I often share with folks, my mom's 95, God bless her, still has her faculties about her, and she supports the church because it's the right thing to do. And when the church asks for assistance, she does that because that's what good people do. And she is of that greatest generation for whom the question of institutions was never much of a question. Believed in them, believed that they helped, believed that they were necessary, and believed in supporting them. Baby boomers, growing up in the time of Watergate, became a little suspicious of institutions. We still support them. We still think that they have benefit. Some of them, we question others. And then as you get younger and go Gen X, Millennial, Gen Z, Gen X, and Gen Y, oh my goodness, the institution itself is almost irrelevant. What matters is, what are you doing? And show me and dashboard that for me, measure it for me, how it works. And so the stewardship campaign gives us a chance to tell our story, and it also gives us a chance to revisit our vision to make certain that it's clear and that people are on board with it, and that it is guiding and directing everything we do as a congregation. It should run like a red line through our budget process. It should run like a red line through our hiring process, through our evaluation of staff, through our process of the committees that's being done, the things we say yes to and the things that we say no to. The vision is just really, really important as it ties to our stewardship and understanding. And we know that if it's hard to give this something if you don't know what it really does. And church has become part of that nebulous, well, what does it really do, if we don't tell the story and demonstrate what it does and what difference it makes. It's also about relationships. This is another thing that is kind of in the what works scenario of how do we, in general philanthropy and secular philanthropy, people tend to give to people, certainly more than institutions, and they tend to give to causes about which they're passionate and believe are making a difference. That relationship is incredibly important, especially when you're looking at larger gifts, because people want to feel connected. First of all, at the just general level of supporting any organization at any level, you want to feel like you're tied to that mission and purpose, that you understand what it is and you're a part of something that's bigger than yourselves, that you have a sense of belonging to that and the work that's being done, that you take some pride in knowing you're supporting something that's making a difference. But it's also about feeling cared for. And this is a gift that happens in the church. If we're maintaining our relationships with folks, we are able to express in many ways that our secular philanthropic partners would envy this idea that we build these relationships at a very intimate level in the church. So it's important that we're continuing to reach out to people in very concrete ways that keep them connected, that keep them feeling good about what they're a part of. And when they know the people involved, that builds trust around the organization in general. And so if we trust the people who are in key leadership in the church, that helps us trust that what we're giving and what we're releasing to the church to manage on our behalf as a gift is going to be managed appropriately, that it's going to do what the organization said it's going to do. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. Another thing that works, this is one of those things you need to be attentive to, and your alumni association figured this out 25 years ago, is that not all donors are the same. They don't give the same. They aren't of the same generation. There are specific differences, and there are specific passions within your ministry or your activities, your group, that are more attractive to them than others. And so it's really important when we're doing our communication that we remember that we write to, first of all, a high-level donor, if you will, a more generous donor. And it's not just about dollars, it's about capacity. That we write to folks who are invested in demonstrating generosity differently, communicate differently with them than we do folks who haven't quite figured it out yet. I'm not going to send the same letter to somebody who shows up about every other Christmas Eve and puts $20 in an envelope and wants a tax receipted, compared to somebody who's a regular generous contributor within their capacity to give and is really helping on a long-term basis the push and function of our ministry. They're just different. They're different letters to write. They're different challenges to offer, different ways to still be grateful and say thank you. And those generational differences, like I said, with my mother, you just pretty much have to ask and send an envelope and she'll send you a check. With my kids, that's a whole different conversation. And you do need to be able, when you're communicating, to again dashboard those things that are significant and why it matters and why being a part of this particular project is important. And then this idea of area of interest, I think our overseas missions and the disciples do this as well as any of our ministries. If you're a part of global missions and if you take an interest, for example, in Southeast Asian ministries, that's what you'll hear about. Now, we've got global missions all around the globe, and they're doing missions in Africa and in Central and South America and the Caribbean, and they're doing great work in Europe. They're doing work all over the place. But if I've expressed an interest in Southeast Asian ministries, those are the stories they're going to tell me when they write to ask for support, because they know I already have a passion for that and an interest in that. So in the church, you might think about, well, who's involved in Habitat for Humanity, or who volunteers at the soup kitchen, or who's always ready to help with the homeless shelter, and if you have the ability within the structure of your team and time and capacity, all of those things, to hone in even deeper with your storytelling that acknowledges specifically areas where folks have passion, that really makes a difference. And so that segmented communication, one size fits no one. So we want to put the right shoe on the right foot, the right size, as it were. That's a bad metaphor, but it's after lunch, so forgive me. Also, what works is making it easy to give. For many years, and I think for many of our congregations until March and COVID hit, we took cash and checks, and that was all we took. And if you wanted to give a gift electronically, if you wanted to use a giving app that allowed you to text to give, if you wanted to transfer money on a direct deposit way as an automatic fund transfer to the church out of your checking account, good luck. Well, there's fees and we don't want to pay those and yada, yada, yada. Now suddenly March came along and we all realized, hey, I got a great idea. We need to let people give electronically. And I'm guessing some folks in your church who resisted that 2.5% to 3.5% fee suddenly realized that $97.50 was better than nothing on a $100 potential gift. And so you've adopted some of these things. So now what I want to suggest to you is it's important that you show people how it works as a way of encouraging people to give this way. And what I mean by that is create a little video. The church I attend, Beargrass Christian Church, on their website under electronic giving, supporting the ministries, there's a drop-down menu and ways I can give. And one of those takes me to another menu with some tutorial videos on here's how you do this. And our youth minister did it with his daughter. All the critical information is blacked out, but you see, she wants to make a gift and how do you do this, and click here and click there and put this information in, and boom, you've supported the ministry of the church. What a great idea to have that available to help your folks so that you show them just how easy this is. And the other thing, now that you've gotten going with this, and hopefully you're getting more comfortable with this, is that if you started with Square or PayPal or Venmo, that now you'll think about, okay, how do we take this to the next level in security, in attention to internal controls, in flexibility, in reporting? I hope that you'll look at an app like Tithely or Givelify or Mobile Cause, that there are some fees. Vanco, there's a bunch of these folks out here who do this, who have very high levels of security, who do very good reporting, the kind of reports that you want for the church, that will tie to your database, and also that will allow you to have multiple administrator ports, so that you have some internal control, that one person is not receiving and managing all of the information. That's one of those trust things we'll come back around to in a minute that's important. So hopefully you're doing these things. Now here's another thing that always works, and that's being grateful, right? It's being grateful, first of all, to God who has given us each other, given us this ministry, given us this group of people to work to answer a particular call and need in our community in a particular kind of way, to be gratitude for the sufficiency that God has provided for us. And this gets into the good theology, right? That we don't give to get, but we give because we've already received. This isn't a quid pro quo. That we're teaching a sound biblical theology around stewardship and giving and the management of the resources that have been entrusted to us, that we're exercising our dominion in faithful ways, that is a part of discipleship and faith formation. We're helping people understand this is a reasonable expectation, that when you join the faith community or choose elect to participate in this community, because some folks don't join anymore, that's another webinar for another day, that that it's okay for us to ask you to support it. That's a part of the deal. And so we don't want you to be surprised or put off when we do that, because we're not going to be embarrassed about doing that. So that's all a part of this, and it's being so grateful to people who give gifts. It's acknowledging gifts, saying thank you to folks who've made commitments, whether it's they showed up at the kids' car wash to support camp scholarships, and the kids write a note that say, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Smith, thanks for coming to the car wash. I went to camp, found Jesus. It was awesome." Or it's the missions chair kind of blindly writing to folks saying, "Hey, we understand that you are a contributor to the church's missions financially, and we're really grateful for that." And you tell a little story of something you've done that's made a difference in the world, because that's important for people to know that their gifts have been received and acknowledged, and to be reassured that we're doing with them what we said we would do. I said earlier about trust and competence. It's really important in your church that you're very transparent about your financial transactions, that you're auditing, that you have good internal controls, no one's ever alone with money, all those things that make up a whole nother webinar, but that we do this part of our practice really well. It engenders trust, it protects people from suspicion or temptation, and it says that we're ambassadors for Christ, and what we do at a high level. We do it right, we do it well, because of who we represent when we're doing it. Before I talk about what doesn't work, I'm going to ask Lee to throw up another poll question for us. And that is, are you going to use, are you planning one for this fall? That's the one. Yeah, thank you, Lee. And maybe the not sure is going to, well, maybe we should. That's great. And maybe you already did one this spring. That's fine. Great response there. And the majority of you are going to do one. And there's enough of you who aren't sure that would just about make it 100%. So that's great. And I hope that this is being helpful to you. That's good measurement for us to see. So thank you very much for that. We're going to keep that data. That's important. So here are some things that, we do these are things that it's good to do these things. Here are some things that it's good not to do. Here are some things we would recommend avoiding if you can. One of those is simply this focusing on the budget. We obsess about the budget. We're below budget. The light bill is due, the salaries are due, the pastor's health insurance is due, and we make it all about paying bills and turn it into this transactional relationship with people, instead of helping them understand that this financial relationship with the church is a transformational one. It impacts us as we give and we share, and the resources are tools that go to work to make life different and better, and to reveal the holy partnership that exists between God and the church, and specifically you as your congregation responding in your place to the things God has called you to do. So don't talk about paying bills, and don't talk about the budget. And some of you say, well, we have to present a budget. That's fine, but along with your budget, tell the stories of things that are working and that matter, and help people see the budget in a larger context of ministry and mission. I don't think a church, unless you're talking about a relationship with money, which is a different spiritual issue to talk about from the pulpit and in a Sunday school class or small group, but unless you're talking about your relationship with money, any other time we talk about money, it ought to be connected to mission, ministry, and vision. It shouldn't just stand alone as a money conversation. We don't want to use guilt. Sure, it works sometimes, but it always ends up breeding some kind of latent resentment that works itself out in a crooked way later. It's not about guilt. It's not about shaming people into doing the right thing, right? It's not about some obligation. Well, you joined the church, and when you did, you signed up to help. That is not what it's about. We joined the church to be involved in a process of the unveiling of God's will for the world, and to be a part of that turning loose in the community around us, which was an opportunity, not an obligation. It's not about shoulding all over people, as a friend of mine used to say, right? It's about inviting. It's about inviting people to prayerfully consider, given what we know we've been called to do, what do you hear God saying to you? How is the Holy Spirit leading you to help make this possible? I also suggest staying away from that. Well, if everybody would give $10 a week more, we'd meet our budget. Well, the reality is that that's not the right solution for everybody. Some people might not really be able to give you $10 more a week. They may already be at or even exceeding their capacity and are exceptionally generous. And there are others for whom $10 would not nearly be a generous enough response based on their capacity. So the equal shares thing is not it. It's about equal commitment. We're inviting everyone to consider prayerfully your role, your place. And so we're not making it about the institution. It's not about keeping the church, right? It's about being a partner in the realm of God. Ultimately, that's what matters. And I'll wrap up my time here pretty quickly with the last thing. We talked about what works, what doesn't work, and now here's what always works. And that is that leadership steps up into generosity. The pastor has to be committed to and growing toward, if you haven't arrived where you want to be yet, being open with your folks about what you're growing to and toward in your own practice of generosity, and then inviting your leadership to take that same journey with you, inviting leaders who already are at the tithe to talk about why they do that and why that matters, and other leaders who have joined you on a journey to grow in your giving, why you're doing that and why that matters to you. And extend that in concentric leadership circles, right? So it's the pastor and staff, and then it's the elders, and then it's the diaconate, or however you're structured internally, right? And your board leadership, your Sunday school teachers, that you grow it out in terms of how you invite people into that challenge. And it always works to allow generous people to tell their stories, to be the ones, more even so than the pastor, to invite others in the congregation into this journey of generosity and what it means to give, and to invite them to consider that, because they're speaking in a way that has all kinds of credibility. People can see it, and it resonates, and people respond to that. That kind of encouragement from people who are just like them, who sit next to them in the pew, and who have been on this journey and can talk about how meaningful it is, and invite them, hold out a hand to take a step with them. That's powerful stuff. And that always works when it comes to growing generosity in your congregation. So Lee, I am finished short of another poll question. Just in case I put everybody to sleep before you begin, I would like you to put up that last question. And that is, are you going to use the materials that we have provided from the Center for Faith and Giving? And don't feel guilty if you're not, and you may not know about them, and later on we'll tell you how to access them. But we're just curious if maybe you already have them. A number of regions, about 17 of our regions, purchase this material and have it available for you and your congregation at no cost to you. And the supplement to Faithful, Hopeful, Loving. Now, see how that ties back into the beginning of my presentation? I'm just so clever. That material has a shorthand version for the COVID reality in which we are, where some of us are not even back in worship and may not be when it's time to receive commitments. And some of us are in hybrid situations. And so there's a piece called Faithful, Hopeful, Loving Essentials. And that is customized to deal with the reality of our time. So there's a deep version that has preaching resources and education resources. Lee contributed to some of those Bible studies. Lisa Davidson and Stephanie Crowder contributed to the preaching resources. It's really rich stuff. And so I really would encourage you to look at it. And even if you're not going to use it this year, there's all kinds of stuff in there for future years that you can access. But that shorthand version, Essentials, will probably be really helpful to you. And we'll tell you later how you can get that if you don't have it already. Lee, take it away, and thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Such good stuff, lots to think about. I know some of you have put some questions in the chat, and we will have some time for that in a few moments. If you've got others, please go ahead and put those there. One question I do want to answer right now, someone asked whether these slides would be available. We are recording this webinar, and so it will be, we will send the link to you, and you can rewatch that or share it with some other leaders in your church if that's helpful. So certainly this will be available. Bruce shared so many good things about what we've sort of always known about stewardship practice and things that are continuing to be true even in this particularly difficult season. And I want to turn now to a few practical things to think about what a stewardship emphasis might look like this fall when things are still so uncertain. Some of us are in sanctuaries, some of us are not, all kinds of things that are just up in the air. So what does it look like? And I want to suggest that this season actually presents some particularly good opportunities for us to do some things that we might not have done before, or to try some things in some new ways. And so I think this is a real season of opportunity in addition to all of the challenges that it presents. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about something we did recently with Disciples Mission Fund. I know we've got some folks on the webinar here who are not disciples, but I know that you all have shared funding systems as well, and so I think you can sort of benefit from this as well. Disciples Mission Fund, if you're not familiar, is our shared funding system for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. It supports over 70 ministries. Most of the contributions to DMF come through congregations, but there's lots of individuals who are generous and support this ministry, the church-wide ministry as well. And DMF supports all kinds of things. We'd be here all day if I listed all 70 ministries, but everything from higher education to regional church camps to global mission partners to health and social service agencies. So it's really the church at work in so many ways. Well, earlier this summer, we had a one-day giving day for Disciples Mission Fund. We called it DMF Day. And we it was a day when we sort of celebrated what DMF does and invited people to make individual gifts to support Disciples Mission Fund. And I just want to share some of the things that we did that worked, because I think they will translate well into a congregational stewardship emphasis as well. The first thing I want to say is to think about stories, right? Bruce mentioned that we're not talking about budgets. This is a chart, a graph of how DMF money is spent. This happens to be the giving from the church that I attend here in Indianapolis. It's a generous church, supports Disciples Mission Fund very well. There's a lot of information in this graph and in this chart, but there's not a story here, or you have to dig deep to find the story. And I think sometimes those of us who really like to think about stewardship, or those of you who have found yourself called to be a church treasurer or a stewardship committee chair, you all are the folks who really like budgets. And thank goodness for you. Thank God that God has called you into leadership in the church, because we need people who love budgets and can build good ones and present them clearly. But the reality is that a lot of people will look at a page like this or your congregation's budget, and their eyes will glaze over and they won't know how to make sense of this or what it all means. So I want to suggest instead that we use stories and images and videos to share how your ministry is transforming lives. We've all learned so much in the last several months about we've all become video producers, right? And how to put a slideshow together, and many of us are still learning all of that. But there's a real opportunity here for telling the story of your ministry through image and video. For Disciples Mission Fund, for DMF Day, we collected videos from all kinds of ministries, from our global mission partners, from our ministries across generations who sprung into action in the fall or in the spring when they realized that churches wouldn't be able to worship in person, and they put together resources so that families could worship together. I love this little guy praying with the minister on the screen. Disciples volunteering, helping rebuild after some tornadoes in Ohio, a grant from National Benevolent Association that supports food pantries and health and human services agencies, folks being a peaceful presence as things have been such turmoil. Obra Hispana, our Hispanic ministry, every Friday since March or April has done an online conversation with church leaders, helping people think about what the church looks like now in their particular context. This was a great story. When it became clear that churches were not going to, or that regions were not going to be able to host church camps in person this year, our outdoor ministry leaders came together and put together an online hub for virtual camps. And this was the Northern Lights regions where people could share resources and ideas and think about how they could help their children and youth in their regions connect, even though they couldn't get together at camp. So we really looked for the stories of the ways that the church was responding to this particular moment and tried to tell those stories. Those weren't all the stories we told. I wanted to mention this. This is a behind the scenes picture of our general minister and president. Bruce mentioned she's been leading prayer on Facebook every week and having conversations with pastors. She produces a video that goes out every Friday morning. So just sort of telling the story about what our gifts do and what they make possible and how the church has been in action. This is a great story, not from this particular season, but from recently, a new church start in North Dakota. This is a Pacific Islander church, and it is the first disciples church in North Dakota, and just started in the last year and a half or so with the support of New Church Ministry and NAPAD, and so I just think those stories are great too. So it's not just the stories of what's happening in this season, but the stories of the church as a whole. So I think there's a real opportunity here to tell our story in image and video. There's also an opportunity to invite other people to tell their stories. On DMF Day, I heard from so many people who shared Facebook posts, who wrote sort of testimonies, telling about why the church had been so important, and then inviting other people to make gifts, to join them in making gifts. And so I think there's an opportunity here in this season too to ask people to share what it is that the church has meant to them and why it has been so important, and inviting each other to give. I think that it's also possible now, in a way that it wasn't before, to invite folks who are not actually at your church to give some testimony. Maybe you reach out to a former intern who's gone on to do something else, or a college student who's away from home, or someone who grew up in the church, and invite them to send a video or to Zoom into your worship service if you're doing it live, and share what it is the church means to them. And there's just all kinds of opportunities this season gives us to share our stories and to invite other people to share as well. One of the best things we did for DMF Day was to invite people to be DMF Day ambassadors. And I think this is something that you all can do in your congregations as well. Bruce talked about the importance of leadership and inviting your leaders. I think that's true of other folks in the congregation too. I think people need to know that the act of giving, the act of stewardship, is not something that only the pastor cares about or only the stewardship chair cares about. People want to hear from their peers, from their friends, the people who they go to Sunday school with, their small group leaders. They want to know sort of what it is that makes this church so important. And there's something really powerful about hearing somebody you respect saying, here's what the church means to me. I'm making a gift. Will you join me in doing that? So I think there's a good opportunity for that as well. And then finally, as Bruce said too, this is a great opportunity to be clear about your mission. Why are you asking people to give? You're not asking people to give to pay the electricity bill. You're not asking them to give to maintain the institution. You're not asking them to give to meet the budget. So why are you asking them to give? And I think that's a conversation you ought to have with your stewardship team or your board or whoever's leading this emphasis. What is it you are asking people to do, and why are you asking them to do it? I have conversations often with congregations who are trying to figure out how to make sense of their own budgets and how much to contribute to Disciples Mission Fund or local mission outreach, how much to give beyond their congregation, right? And what I've found is that congregations are stronger and healthier when they take a portion of what they have and send it out, right? When they look outside themselves, when they use what they have, when they use their resources for something beyond their own survival. That's what makes strong and healthy congregations. I bet that's true of your congregation. I bet you could point to times in your congregation's history when that's been true. And I would argue that that's the same question that you are inviting people in your congregations to consider when they are deciding how much they will give to the church in the next year. You're asking them to think outside themselves, to think beyond their own survival. You're asking them to give, I think, because their gifts have the power to transform lives. That's not a small thing. That's an important invitation that you are giving to people. And so finally, I think the last important thing and another great opportunity of this season is the importance of saying thanks. If you made a gift to DMF Day, you got this video in your email the next day.
Thank you for your gift.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
고맙습니다.
Thank you for your generosity
and kindness.
We disciples must stick together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much for your generosity and for your support of the Disciples Mission Fund.
So you could do this, right? You could make a thank you video, or find a way to be creative. Have kids write thank you notes, as Bruce said, or have them make a video to share with those who have pledged to give them the next year, or find a way to creatively say thank you, because what you're inviting people to do is to give of their whole lives, and that's a big thing. Our time is running short, so I do want to turn to some of the questions that you might have, and I know there's some in the chat. Bruce, have you got some there that we could start with?
Let's see. The question was asked about giving in person, or I see, given that in-person communication is limited, should letters and emails actually be different? Lee, would you like to touch on that, or I can? Go ahead.
I think the basics are the same, right? That we want to hear the story of your ministry, and that the communication tool might look different, but the communication itself is the same message.
Yeah, I would agree. And it's probably a good time for handwritten notes. Who doesn't want to get a handwritten note? So if you have the ability to do that, or to enlist a team of people to do that, that's a wonderful way to enhance your communication in this time. Let's see, when a congregation is disengaged because you're going through transition, how do you encourage members to revisit their commitment particularly if the vision is not real clear? Well, my sense is that you're still doing mission and ministry in some form. It didn't quit when your last minister walked out the door. At least I hope not. I hope that you have people engaged and plugged into the community in a variety of different ways. And so talking about those and why it matters and who would miss us if we were gone is a great question. And hopefully you can answer that. And the answer to that is the inspiration then to keep the support coming while you wait. And there's this idea of the thank you for the gift we haven't received yet. Thank you, God, for the moment we haven't gotten to that we're anticipating and waiting for, but we know it's coming, and we're grateful for that. And so the congregation in its anticipation can show its investment by contributing. That's kind of off the top of my head, but I think that's where I'd go. Lee, would you do that any different?
Yeah, I think I think that makes sense. And I think there's a real sense right now too of I think we're all having a hard time thinking very far ahead in lots of ways. And so if we can help our congregations imagine where we might be or where God is calling us. I think that's a real gift as well.
Well, really good questions here. One has to do with virtual services. Is it possible that you're getting non-members contributing? Well, I hope so. I hope that you're inspiring people in such a way and providing an opportunity and a kind of breadcrumbs or a map or trail for them to follow so they can respond to what you're doing. And they may be, and I think that's something you'd want a financial secretary to track. There are some cautions about the whole virtual worship thing that we need to be aware of in general as we think about how we will do them going forward, because we're finding statistically people as a group only stay for about 20 minutes of your hour worship. So if you've just got a camera set up in the back and that's all you're doing, and you're doing your normal Sunday worship, that's fine for a certain segment of people, but there's some other ways in which you might want to think about how do we break these pieces out and how do we enhance some of these things and make them available in kind of a menu that people might be able to access going forward. I know most of us are just so grateful right now we figured out how to get it online that the idea of something else is like overwhelming. But thinking ahead, that's one of those things you might want to put out there. And I see Brandon Gilman talking about that they do a 25 to 30 minute worship, and the average engagement is 12 minutes. And that's there you go. So that's telling us something that we need to be responding to.
And of course, the reality may be that they were always engaged for 12 to 13 minutes. They just were just sitting.
When you see this going on during your sermon, you probably...
There was a question earlier about, you had talked about segmented communication, and someone asked, what about in a context where the minister doesn't know how much people give? How do we do that, and can you address that?
Sure. Well, and of course, we believe that in the best of circumstances between pastor and congregation, there's a high enough level of trust that there's appropriate sharing of information around giving. That's another 90-minute webinar. I'm not going to go there other than to acknowledge that exists in some places it doesn't. In the places where it doesn't, and I was one of those places, a place I served for a long time till we changed that culture from secrecy to confidentiality, was that the financial secretary would determine, the secretary generated several different letters, and the financial secretary kind of filled in the blanks and made sure that the right letters went to the right place. It was inefficient. It wasn't always accurate because there are things pastors know about people that help us understand people's commitment, help us understand their capacity to give, that's not reflected in a number. But that was a starting place, was the financial secretary looked at how frequent gifts came from different people, how large gifts were, and that was sort of the initial sorting out. Not optimal, but a way to begin to engage.
Yeah, and I think there's some good resources out there about that topic, and I think, so if that's not the reality in your congregation, I'd encourage you to reach out to Bruce or me, and we can sort of point you to some other resources that might help move that conversation along as well.
Absolutely. Somebody asked about incorporating PPP fund support. I do think, particularly if you do a narrative style budget, and you're going to have to, in a line item budget, you're going to have to show that income. And I think we're grateful for that. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that the federal government believed in nonprofit institutions enough to include us in those gifts and talk about how that made a difference, how you responsibly use that gift so that mission and ministry could continue to take place. And how in some cases it may have allowed you to set other monies aside to begin or to have future resources for new ministries because you had that support. I would frame it in that context. And of course, none of us know if we're going to have to pay it back yet or not. At some point, the government will come up with the right formula. So I hope all of you realize that at this moment, those are not completely forgiven loans. we pray that they will be. But when you show them, you probably, in a gap kind of situation, general accepted accounting practice, you'd be showing that as a potential accounts payable until you receive notice that you've been granted forgiveness for that loan.
Thanks. Bruce, there's been several questions in here, kind of getting into some specifics about online giving, which seems to me maybe a good place to send people to your website, and maybe you could say a little bit more about what's there.
We've got a lot of resources there, and it's broken into teaching and resources and a toolbox where you can find answers to questions like this that's being asked about electronic giving. The specific questions about what a certain app or company is able to provide, you're best to contact them directly. We don't pretend to know what all of their intricacies are, but most of them are very much built to interface with database and Excel type programs. I did see that in the chat, but you'll find all kinds of resources at the centerforfaithandgiving.org, and I hope you'll visit that, and Lee will put up stuff also about how to contact us. But say a little bit about the DMF site.
Yep, just to highlight disciplesmissionfund.org, where there's lots of good resources for church treasurers. You can look at sort of what your church has given and how that's been distributed across the church, and so lots of good resources there. And so I encourage you to check out both those websites. And then here's our contact information. I know I would welcome a conversation with you either about DMF or about stewardship in particular, or about how your congregation might think through how it looks beyond itself, and especially in these particularly difficult times. So please feel free to reach out, and I know Bruce feels the same.
Absolutely. That's my cell phone number, not my desk number. So I answer my own phone. So your call's that important to the mission we're engaged in. We want to be able to receive it and respond to it as quickly as possible. So if I'm not able to answer, please leave me a voicemail. I'll get back with you honestly as quickly as I'm able. The email there, of course, that's another great way to reach out and connect with both Lee and I. And I know Lee's very quick to respond to both phone calls and to email. And I try to be as well. We want to talk to you. That's what the church has put us here for. We want to be a resource, and we want you to consider us a partner in your ministry. So that's a cue for me to say thank you for participating in this event. Thank you for supporting Disciple Mission Fund, which empowers us to be your partner in ministry and to engage in that transformational work. And I want to thank Lee, who's a brilliant colleague in all of this, for the work that she does on behalf of the church. She's written a couple of really good books, by the way. You might look for those as well. In your Amazon search, you will find some things she has authored, and I hope you will look for those. But thank you. You've given us a gift of time that we can't give back. That's a one-time payment, no refunds. So thank you. Thank you for that time.
Yeah, and I'll just add my thanks. Thank you to Bruce for those kind words, and thank you to all of you for what you're doing, for continuing to lead the church and to be present with your people, and to just share the good news of God's love in these times and in all times. So thank you for all you're doing, and thanks for being here today.
God bless everyone. Thank you.